Welcome everyone to Design and Heritage, a symposium that's been organized by the graduate program in historic preservation. Tonight is just one of dozens of important talks presented by PennDesign this year and spanning the fields of architecture, landscape architecture, city planning, historic preservation, and urban spatial analysis. These talks are an essential forum for us to come together with our peers and neighbors and around our shared interests as designers and preservationists and as citizens. So I encourage you, for visitors, to look at our website or sign up for our newsletter and find out more. Tonight, we are welcoming back to PennDesign Marlon Blackwell. Some of you who may have met Marlon last semester when he came for reviews at the end of the semester. Before I launch into his official biography, I just have to tell you how lucky we are to have him here tonight. Marlon is an amazing designer, but also a down-to-earth person, the kind of person you want to get to know better. His work has a global reach and impact, but is deeply rooted in Arkansas and the South. In this, he sets a standard for how we might all approach our practice as an extension of our lived experience and an investment in the communities that are important to us, carried out with such creativity and collaboration that our work has a ripple effect across the profession and the culture that it helps to shape. Marlon Blackwell, FAIA, is a practicing architect in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and serves as the E. Fay Jones Distinguished Professor at the Fay Jones School of Architecture and Design at the University of Arkansas. So just in case you missed the fact that Fay Jones was associated with the University of Arkansas, you have it both in the name of the school and a professorship. And t-shirts. There's the Fay Jones t-shirts as well. Marlon's design strategies draw upon the vernaculars, on typologies, and the contradictions of place, and strategies that seek to transgress conventional boundaries of architecture. As a side note, well, let me get to the side note in just a moment. Marlon received his undergraduate degree from Auburn University in 1980. He received an MArch II degree from Syracuse University in 1991. A monograph of his early work is entitled An Architecture of the Ozarks, the work of Marlon Blackwell. And it was published by Princeton Architecture Press in 2005. The significance of his contribution to design is clear in the numerous awards that he's received. He was named the U.S. Artist Ford Fellow in 2004 and was selected in 2012 for the Architecture Prize from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. In 2016, the Office of Marlon Blackwell Architects was the recipient of the Cooper Hewitt National Design Award in Architecture. He's also a tremendous teacher. He began teaching at the University of Arkansas in 1992. He served as the head of the Department of Architecture from 2009 to 2015 and was named Design Intelligence magazine's one of their 30 most admired educators in 2005. Something, by the way, he shares with our own Winka Doubledom and Marilyn Taylor. He was the George Baird Professor at the Cornell University, the Thomas Jefferson Professor at the University of Virginia, the Errol Saarinen Visiting Professor at the University of Michigan, the Paul Rudolph Visiting Professor at Auburn University, and he was a visiting professor at the University of Texas at Austin, in Austin, Texas, as well as some other schools, but save the really important ones right there. Because I know you're going to want to not miss anything about what Marlon's going to say, I'll ask you to please silence your cell phones as we get started. And with that, it's my great pleasure to turn the podium over to Marlon Blackwell.
Thank you, Fritz, and thank you for having me back. I love Philadelphia, and any excuse to come, I'll do it. In fact, it was so important this time. We were supposed to leave today for our family spring break to Spain, and we just moved it 2 days so I could come here because I love Philadelphia and I love the opportunity. First of all, I just thought it was strange that it's a design and heritage, and then they invited us, and I got to talking with my partner, who's also my wife. She always keeps me straight, and she said, "Well, don't you know that 50% of our projects are preservation or adaptive reuse?" I said, "Oh, well, yeah, of course, that makes some sense there," because I get wrapped, it all kind of flows into one thing, and you forget about that, and you forget about the landscapes you work in and all of that it's all part of a heritage condition. I like to start every lecture I have with my favorite building in the world. It's right here. It's called the Jesus Barn. It's right in Fayetteville, Arkansas. It's a local building that's native to its own region, but it's imbued with the universal. Its original purpose here is it's been transformed with a new program that allows it to be simultaneously local and universal. There's a productive tension about this structure I really love. And as an architect working between and even beyond vernaculars, we're kind of seeking to make our own corner of the world stand in for the whole in terms of how we practice. And so this corner that we're working in is really a space betwixt and between transition and ambiguity. And our work seeks to intensify this condition by defamiliarizing our relationship to it. And so, as Fritz said, we do take a bit of a transgressive position that provides our work with what I would call specificity drawn for the particulars of the local, and in an attempt constantly to situate the universal. So for me, this is the most aspirational thing I can show you tonight. Everything else is downhill. So we'll go from there. When Princeton approached us about doing a monograph, they were very insistent that we have an iconic image of our place. So I live in the Ozarks. In the Ozarks for us has always been about northwest Arkansas, is that intersection of hills and valleys. In fact, Fayetteville, Arkansas is the only town in northwest Arkansas that's built on hills. So you can actually stand in the downtown in certain areas and look out and see chicken houses and pastures and cows and all of that sort of thing. So we found this condition where the silhouette you see is called Old Main. It's the oldest building on our campus. It sits high on the highest hill in Fayetteville, overlooking this valley. A cow with her new calf, and it's great. Education, culture comes together with agriculture is what it's all about. We go to photograph it, and a Walmart truck drives right through the middle of it. And of course, totally forgot we're a great center of commerce too, the home of Walmart and Tyson Chicken and J.B. Hunt Trucking and all of that. So all of that comes together as this incredible roux that really makes the setting for which we work. Now we like to call where I live the land of Bill and a billion chickens. And what I love about our chickens here are the chicken houses that come with them. And these wonderful structures that are about 30 to 40 feet wide, some 200 to 600 feet long in the landscape, and thousands of them throughout the landscape. And if you see one, you almost always know where you're at in the landscape because they're almost always oriented east-west. So the chicken farmers figured out pretty quickly that if you keep it narrow on the east and west, you can minimize the sun exposure, control it along the south, and that way the chickens don't cook before their time. And we just love the common sense of that, the sort of pragmatism associated with that. So we spent a lot of our time trying to think like a chicken farmer in the way in which we try to get our buildings to perform. So, the place I live is a place of, I like to say, real natural beauty, and simultaneously one of real constructed ugliness. It's a place deemed to be in the middle of nowhere, but actually close to everywhere. Because of Walmart, we have an airport with more direct flights to major cities than any other small town in the country. So I can go to New York, DC, LA, all of this in just one stop. Not Philly yet, but we're working on that, hopefully. So, you know, it's a place that's very often considered aesthetically and culturally impoverished, and that, of course, is not true, but it's always perceived that way. Words like abandonment, erasure, exploitation, nostalgia, they're all considered aspects of this place, and I see it as no more real, these conditions, no more real than the natural beauty and the local form that you find there. And in fact, as I said, this isn't just a setting for our work, it's really become part of our work. And it's a land of disparate conditions, but in it we don't see a negative. In fact, we see a deep source of possibilities in our direct experience with the world as it's given to us, and our attempt to find ways to retranslate it, to represent it as we find it. Now, I'm working from a very simple conviction that architecture is larger than the subject of architecture. So what we try to do is look at the world with a wide-angle microscopic lens to generate ideas and actions from our everyday engagement with the world, between one's own personal history and the history of the discipline, between what is extraordinary and what is just ordinary. And I show you this. You might recognize this building on the left. Fritz mentioned Fay Jones. Fay was a good friend and mentor. This is his masterwork, Thorn Crown Chapel. It was voted by the AIA to be the 4th best building of the 20th century. It is a masterpiece. We've taken everybody we can take that comes to Arkansas there. Everybody from Herzog and de Meuron to Liebskin and Eisman and Zumthor, Glenn Murcutt, you name it, we've taken them there. And they all have a very similar experience, a very kind of visceral experience with it, because it's, in many ways, architecture at the highest level. Now, it's in Eureka Springs, about an hour from where I live, and just across town in Eureka, on the other side of town, is another icon, which is part of a tourist attraction called the Passion Play. And tourists come here to see the life of Christ acted out by actors, and it's very popular. And they had designed this very tall icon of Christ that could be seen from miles and miles. And as they were erecting it, they were informed by the FAA that it was so tall that it would have to have a flashing blue light on the top of its head in order to, to let planes know. And they were, of course, very upset about this, but they didn't want to redesign it. So rather than go back to the drawing board, they just cut him off at the knees and pushed him back into the ground. And he's known affectionately in Northwest Arkansas as Milk Carton Jesus, because he's got the proportions of a milk carton, still seen from many ways. Anyways, I show this to you to show you the conditions of the high and the low that we operate between. And we don't see our mission in any way as trying to resolve one condition to the other, but in fact to create a condition of resonance between what we are given. And that's an operative word for us. And so what this demands of us in many ways is to be very careful observers of our place, of the geological, the biological, and of course, always the cultural, in which we can develop a bottom-up process, which is what we try to do, that allows us to amplify the small things that manifest the large things. So then this line of thinking, we can engage some very critical questions through, in the words of the great poet, let's say William Carlos Williams in his poem Patterson, that there are no ideas but in things. And so these things and this thinking about things and the ideas that come from them allow us to address the question, how do you embrace the world without being consumed by it? And secondly, how do you enrich and dignify the experience of being in the world for those who engage our work? That is an ongoing set of questions and challenges we're always trying to address. Leonardo da Vinci, I think, said it best about working from the direct experience of the world or of things when he said, it should not be so hard for you to stop sometimes and look into the ashes of a fire or cloud or mud or light places in which you may find really marvelous ideas. And that's all we're trying to do, is out of the muck of our own condition is to find really marvelous ideas. So I think in many ways it's safe to say that most architecture isn't very good. Most good architecture is good enough for most days. But there are some buildings, some architecture that should rise above the everyday, which necessarily challenges us to return to the significance of the everyday, of the world as it's given to us, and to enrich it and revalidate it with the things that we make. And so we've decided to stay in what we like to call the Ozark Outback and work between the motivating forces of the everyday to deal with things that are at once strange and familiar. In fact, we've constantly looking for analogs in these conditions between conditions that are nature-made and those that are more culture-made. I'm hoping to see this building on the right here next week, which I'm very excited about. And working between the ideal and the improvised in our culture. Very important. Again, the condition of resonance is operative here. And so we try to find ways to represent what's already there. Just operations that can allow us to take something that's relatively similar and take a more transgressive attitude to kind of reframe it, to repurpose it in a sense, and to reoccupy it in a new and different way. When I was growing up, my desire before I became an architect was to be a cartoonist. Except I finally came to the conclusion after reading an article that I couldn't be a cartoonist because the article made some statement that most cartoonists are alcoholics. And I was like, oh, I don't want to deal with that. So I'll become an architect. And well, anyways, lots of issues there too. So, but nonetheless, we approach everything, or at least I do, sexually and as a visage and in profile. So trying for the most reductive means of expression. And so we've got like a whole taxonomy, a whole collection of, these are all projects in the office that we've done with tons more, but always that's how we understand it, as a kind of singularity in its place, first and foremost. So that's allowed us to kind of engage typologically some different things. The Tower House, for example, everybody gets a project like this, I know. But you know, working from our own place here, from our travels, places like Lucca, trip to Yemen that I took where people live in the towers, but their social space, their great social space is the Mufraj at the very top. We're in the city limits of Fayetteville, and we're looking at what nature provides us as this thing hits the ground, the textures and patterns. And we're very intrigued with the striated bark of the white oak, which we milled about 20 miles away. It's a renewable resource that becomes a white oak lattice fin around the 50-foot high stairway, which also marks the mature datum of our oak trees here. They don't get very big where I'm at because our cash crop is rocks, and so the oaks just don't get very big. But then once you get up above the canopy, there's this whole other order in the landscape of industrial and agricultural buildings, almost all detailed in white panels and white metal. Just a whole nother order. And so we came up with our own white metal panel system that slips over the wood like a husk and creates its own kind of grammar or syntax in its place, all trying to kind of respond and to operate in dialogue. And then when you get to the top, it really becomes an active view and how one views the view beyond. A room with a 360-degree view here, and then a stair folds out. You go into a room with control views to the landscape, but open to the sky, sky court in which you can take a dinner or sleep out under the stars. It's really quite fantastic to kind of engage the world both horizontally and vertically. Another small project, this was for a girlfriend's, an ex-girlfriend's mother. She, one thing I tell students, if you ever get dumped and, the other person asks you to be a friend, at least consider the possibilities. I didn't get to do my mother's house, but I did get to do my ex-girlfriend's mother's house. 10 years later, she came back as a beekeeper and said, I need a place to take the honey from the honeycomb and turn it into jars of honey to sell along the street. So we just made this little structure, 8 foot by 24 foot. It's a honey house. But focused on one element, which is a steel plate and faceted glass wall that's load-bearing. So it's really a wall made of voids that acts to organize and display. The honey also acts as a brise-soleil, and then creates conditions of opacity, transparency, translucency in the faceting as it fuses with the landscape around. A project we had the opportunity to scale up and deal with another typology, that of the recreational building, the golf clubhouse, we were approached by Mr. Tyson of Tyson Foods, who wanted a private clubhouse, but he said, I don't want another Terra or plantation-looking thing or a hunting lodge, which most of these look like. He said, I want a building of the 21st century that's part of its place, but also respects the traditions and rituals of the game. And so we, like I say, we have great stone here, so we all locally quarried stone, dry stacked, and we wrap the building, this tube, in copper and a 1,000-year material that will turn into a leathery brown over time, and in really kind of a repackaging of this traditional program, but then adding some surprises as well, like the skylit bath in the wet area. When this was published in Arc Daily on the website, somebody blogged, hey, Zumthor called and would like his baths back. And I was like, oh, God, man, I know I must have been channeling that. And anyways, about 3 hours later, somebody blogged and said, hey, the Romans called Peter, and they would like their baths back. So, it's all part of a lineage here. So, but anyways, it was a great opportunity to do. It was something, it wasn't about golf, as I was informed by the owner. It was about people and space. And that's something I think as designers we should be able to engage. The idea that typologies for us, which are, architecture in some ways freed from style, is that it is adaptive, it is dynamic, it is evolutionary. And this is a post-Katrina house in Biloxi, Mississippi. The group of folks got together, Oprah Winfrey's Angel Network and Autodesk. What a great combination. 7 model homes to address the new FEMA regulations and to challenge the new urbanist proposition for the Mississippi Gulf Coast, which, I think folks decided not everybody wants to live in grandmother's house, with a geranium on the porch. But in fact, really deal seriously with having to lift houses now above the storm surge, anywhere from 6 to 12 feet. So this house starts with the typology of the shotgun, and then we have to lift it. But the thing that we're ever mindful of as Southerners is that the porch is that interface between the private world of the house and the public world of the street, and was very important to the social and urban fabric to remain where it typologically always has. But then we stack the program to make it more adaptable to various sites and more concise in its footprint, and that became what we call the porch dog. And this is it. And this is a market rate house, a prototype that can be repeated. It's $130 a square foot house. And anyways, quite excited about that and the possibilities it holds for the future. Of course, this is what the New Urbanists came up with. It's called the Katrina Cottage. And I can tell you which one won't be there after the next category 4 storm surge. So these things are real, they have consequences, and again, if typologies are only seen as fixed, they just become a discussion about style, and I think this is really what this suffers from. So I'm going to show you 3 projects that deal primarily with landscapes, and then I want to show you some projects that deal maybe was why you really asked me to be here, but Pamela assured me that if I could talk about landscapes in a heritage sort of way, that might be relevant as well. So this is a project in Indianapolis, the Indianapolis Museum's 100-acre art and nature park that we did with Ed Blake, a great landscape architect, a good friend who's unfortunately passed away, and Mary Miss, environmental artist from New York. Worked for several years on this. It's located in the oxbow of the White River that runs through downtown Indianapolis, and the canal that also a remnant runs through, so it's effectively a peninsula island. Used to be a pristine forest, became a pasture, and then became a quarry back in the 50s. That was dug out to get limestone to build the interstate through Indianapolis, and then it filled up with water and became an amenity in the middle of the town. And we were asked to kind of deal with the volatile condition between land and water. So because of indiscriminate development upriver, they've had 3 100-year floods in the last 8 years. As water rises, this is the river here, which rises above the lake and breaches into the lake, scours the landscape, and was effectively 100 acres into a floodway and flood zone and wetland, there's only 0.67 acres that you can actually build on in this property. Site-specific art, that's different, but actual buildings. So it wasn't too difficult to find our site for this visitor center in the middle of the park. It's part of a series of pathway journeys that Ed designed, not a destination itself, but an extension of these pathways. These are some of the different aspects of the park here. For us, we came to a wet fecund site that also fills with water, and we were challenged to elevate our building 5 feet above the forest floor because of the floodplain, which was really not something you want to do so much. But working with Ed, who'd been looking at our sketches, he came up with this brilliant idea of a series of figured mounds that would point to places in through the trees to views, and the water could rise, and then the water could flow underneath, and this would just float above these mounds like an apparition in the woods. And so it's a very quiet building, and it's a simple exoskeleton with a material surface that operates for the deck, for the wall, and the canopy, with the sandwiches, the program in between is kind of like a taco in a way. And we looked at, again, what we're given in the place, the butterfly wings that we looked under a microscope that we found, leaves eaten away by insects that revealed a structure to the leaf but a porosity to the surface. And it raised the question, could we develop a porosity in a structure that would allow air or water to move through it? So this very simple structure where it's quite transparent and porous that allows, like again, the air, water, and light to move through. We pleated the system so we could create intensities of light or rain or snow that come through. And the structure, which was brilliantly designed by Guy Nordenson, a great structural engineer, you don't really see. You only see it through its shadow that is in constant movement because of the way the sun moves, and it intensifies that condition. So this building pulsates with the rhythms of the day and the season. And in order to get it past the codes, we had to infill the deck with these acrylic bars, UV-rated acrylic bars, so you can walk on it. But when we light it up at night, it becomes its own kind of, say, ghost-like figure in the woods. Very simple, charred cedar for the black service box with restrooms and kitchen and so forth, and then a glass vitrine for the lounge to kind of take assessment of the experience of the art park and just kind of relax and enjoy the light and getting out of the sun. Water popped, ebonized white oak, very polished, but then we allow the wood that wraps it to turn silver. So there's this conditions, temporal conditions of impermanence and permanence together. And then this is all silver now with the abstract black box that sits in the landscape. And of course, you have to have the killer image, of course. This is the one we always hope that shows up on a cover of something. So with this in mind, we recently have completed a building with another really great landscape architect, Jim Corner, and his office, Field Conditions in Memphis. It's about 5 hours from where I live. It's a great opportunity. It's the largest urban park in America, a 4,500-acre urban park. And what you're looking at here is the crossing from Arkansas to Memphis, the river. And, Memphis is, it's to me, the southern city with the most soul. It's, the birthplace of rock and roll, Beale Street, the blues, the food. I mean, it's just great. That's the east side, or west side of Memphis. When all of this was happening, this rock and roll and all that stuff back in the 50s, what you had on the west side of Memphis was essentially this, which is a 4,500-acre penal farm where prisoners worked the land, and that's how they fed themselves. And then that food was also used to help feed the county as well. So it was and then whatever was left over, it was sold away. But for many years, this is what prisoners did in this area, was work the land. And this, after a while, fell out of favor as a system, and it became in the ownership of the county, Shelby County. And they really didn't know what to do with it. 4,500 acres is a lot to manage. So a 501c came about, which decided to start a park in the city. And it was called, the Shelby Farms Park. And so in many ways, this is a transformation of a kind of real hardship into something that's recreational for the city. This is Memphis here, the downtown, the river. This is Shelby Farms, nearly the size of Memphis itself, the downtown part. And in the middle of this, JCFO had worked really the whole park doing different vignettes in the park, but the real focus was in the heart of the park, this lake in the center that really didn't have any identity. And they needed things to generate revenue like visitor center, restaurant retreat center, boat kiosk, stage pavilions, things that could really activate the center and create revenue streams to help support the park, because they get very little public money. So this small lake was expanded to an 80-acre lake, and we were charged with doing about 7 buildings. And so we saw this as an opportunity to do an ensemble of buildings that shared a similar language. One of the things we noticed being in the park is that wherever there was shade, there were people. And no shade, no people. A picnic table in shade would be filled with people. 20 feet away, sitting in the sun, nobody. So we were wondering, what if we could make buildings that create their own shade, like through the language of the porch. And so each one becomes part of a kind of porch grammar in this ensemble. And so this is the landscape we're dealing with, the lake, and the first building is the visitor center. They also have buffalo here, so that's not something you associate with Memphis, but they have lots of buffalo. So we went back to origins, back to looking at, again, typologies, looking at the small structures that occupied this agricultural landscape, the sharecropper's cabin with its porch, the large agricultural sheds, as a place to start this language we wanted to develop. So our first building, the Visitor Center, is an 8,000 square foot building with an 8,000 square foot porch faced to the south. And the purpose of that is to allow it to be programmed year-round and to be activated, because, when you're in the sun in Memphis, it's not cool. But even when you're in the shade in Memphis, it's not cool either. It's because there's no breeze half the time. So you're just sweating like a pig in the shade. So we had to do something about that. As you can see, there are 5 20-foot, what we call big-ass fans. That's the trademark for them. And they ventilate the shade. So it really creates an analog with how nature works in the forest. It's that the porosity of the canopy of the trees keeps it cool, the ventilation. So we also created breezeways, dog trots here, second growth cypress we can get. This is all aluminum bar grates used in the agricultural industry quite a bit. Wonderful bosque that's really quite large that JCFO did. You move through that bosque from the parking in through these breezeways onto this porch with this unmitigated great panoramic view of the lake and landscape beyond. So here we go, moving through, boom, boom, underneath the porch. And then all the program is along that edge with this nice indoor-outdoor. One of the unlucky buffalo becomes the mascot there. And, it's a very transparent building. It's, the idea is to make something tough and not precious, although highly crafted and precise. And looking back here, and really how the landscape and everything will come together, these trees will grow in quite lovely over the years. And then we light it up from inside. We got a great lighting designer, Richard Renfro from New York, and University of Arkansas grad, I might add. But it's all orchestrated with lights on the inside, so it becomes a lantern at night in the middle of the park. So the park can be, its hours be extended even further. And I show this to you, this is after an event, but the event was 5 o'clock at night in June. It was 95 degrees, had just rained, 95% humidity, and there was a big party that went on here and nobody's sweating. Everything, the fan and everything is cooling everybody. So again, it's very performative as well. So stage pavilion that also acts as a shade pavilion when it's not being used here, and can be used from both sides, from the lake and from the amphitheater side. A boat kiosk here, where all the kayaks and concessions are at for the park, and creates, again, its own shade. You pull the boats out underneath there, and then before you transition to the water. Picnic pavilions creating their shade. We call these the crickets. They're all over the place. And then I have a render because I don't have a good shot. We haven't really professionally shot this yet, but the restaurant retreat center with a new farm-to-table restaurant with Kimball Musk has put in, along with a multi-purpose event center. And the thing that makes it unique is this huge porch. It's a porch that's 80 feet deep. It's actually more people outside than inside, and it's 3 months reservation right now trying to get the evening slot to see the sunset as this faces west. And so people are really like being out here. This works really hard to cut down the sun and the glare as the sun sets, and it's quite magical as you see the transition from day to night here, and then the silhouettes of the figures that sort of articulate this landscape. So very excited about that, but I want to shift gears now to another landscape that is probably not as particular to where we're at here, but where I live, we're primarily agricultural. We're a 60% forested state and lots of farms and so forth. So many of the farms and the rural landscapes are being annexed and turned into suburban developments, gated communities, gated office park stuff. We're not ideal. It's all messy. We deal with that. But, you know, this is the landscape of a place not far, Rogers, Arkansas, not more than about 15 years ago. And today it's become the land of beige, if you know what I mean. This suburbia is the land of beige. And the land of ersatz, you know, how many materials can I cram in one building? How many formal moves can I make? I mean, if you get out of your car in the parking lot and you walk to a building, and before you get there, you can count 8 different materials, there's something wrong. If you can count 8 different formal moves, there's something wrong. The singularity and the power of structures like this is completely absent, and yet this was what that landscape was really about. So we decided to make commentary on that for a new pediatric clinic right in the middle of this suburban condition, I'll call it. So it's called the Harvey Pediatric Clinic, and it's just sort of a new take on healthcare and at least this guy's vision. So this is it. It sits in the middle. This is facing south. There are no windows. We said, what if we didn't have windows on the south? What if we skylit all the exam rooms? Because they didn't want windows anyway, but we could skylight them. What if we just only used one material in 2 colors? What if we reduced it so much that this takes on the characteristics of the of the ghost of the things that was? And so here we are. That sits in its landscape. Beautiful land of beige. In fact, the only thing really iconic in the landscape are these guys here, you know, but we have a different kind of power, I think, here. So the parking lot becomes the plaza, in effect. You can drive around and you drop the patients off here underneath and then park, which is a very dignified sort of thing to do. And it's also recognizes that you're driving by at 40 miles an hour. You may not be coming here. So that has to activate our perceptions too, so that as we drive by, we discover that in fact there are 2 sides to this thing. And so it presents itself in a kind of more normal condition along the north side, provides views with the north light. Whoops. See if I can do that again. Here we go. And so you have a porch for the staff entrance in the back, and then the public towards the front here. So people are dropped off, they go in here, in this nice little lobby. So we thought it would be important if kids are not feeling well, they come in, they have this sort of iconic gesture that they can identify with. They come in, and we wash the entire stairway that they ascend to in blue light. We're using blue glass and just create a kind of otherworldly condition. It's not paint, it's just light washing its way down, and just to kind of decompress them a little bit as they come up. And then just a nice reception area, just a free plan. You can circulate around, so you can actually start over here and see the doctor and move back around through, check out, and go right back down. So very simple circulation, nice place, nice views to the suburban landscape here. All are beautiful. Maybe if we reframe it, we'll see. But very nice, humane spaces for the kids that are all skylit, warm. Nurses that work there, the nurses station doctors have skylights from above too, so in the middle of the building where normally it would be dark is washed in light. And for the doctors who are on call, we have a loft up here, lounges where they can, sit back, relax before they go into surgery and so forth. So in many ways, a very kind of humanist approach, but at the same time, something that's very, in its own way, critical of its context and where it's at. This is the staff entrance here at night. So, you know, the word sustainability is used and thrown around all the time. I think we've gotten past the greenwashing of our professions a bit to where it's really become part of what we do. Even clients ask for it. That's amazing, because 10 years ago, you couldn't even get a client to ask for it. But what I've come to the conclusion of after doing this for 10 years is it's less about the bells and whistles and the, you know, I got a big gutter or I've got a big cistern so I can demonstrate that water falls in it and stuff like that. I think it's really about what we already have and how we use what we already have. And so I show these photos to you from the 40s, 50s. These are Getty images of William J. Fulbright's mill. His family owned a mill. I'm sure you heard of Senator Fulbright, who was from Fayetteville, Arkansas. And they made farm implements, plowshares, axe handles, wagon wheels, and so forth. And post-war, there was less and less a demand of this. And right at about the same time, there was another fellow, an architect from Fayetteville, who was doing the first fine arts complex in the country on the University of Arkansas's campus. His name was Edward Durrell Stone. And Mr. Fulbright approached Mr. Stone and said, I've got all of these implements and I really don't know what we can do with them. Nobody seems to want to buy them. And Mr. Stone said, I've got an idea. What if we turn them into an international line of furniture? And we could use it to populate my new complex and then we could sell it. And he said, a brilliant idea. So here, plowshares become chairs, wagon wheels become stools. We take the great craft of basket weaving in the Ozarks, strip the white oak to its bark, and make chase loungers with big, giant plowshare handles, and then modify them with the legs. And what's happened is this furniture now, I was just in the Cooper Hewitt last October walking around, and one of these is on display, you know, and so something that was to be discarded, the past was provided a future, and the possibilities extend onward. And so this, for me, is an analog to how we think about the architecture and the opportunities that we get. So I love this saying, the new develops out of the old, but the old, however, is changed in the light of the new. And so that condition of resonance becomes ever more important when we're working with existing fabric. So we had the great opportunity to take our architecture school at the University of Arkansas, an old Beaux-Arts library we'd been in for 40 years, and renovate it and then add to it about 3-4 years ago. And our school has always been disparate, separated. We had landscape on one part of the campus, interiors on another, architecture here. And this was an opportunity to bring everybody together under one roof. Now, our challenge was we could only add to the west side, and the university said the addition had to be the same width and length of the east side. And, you know, a lot of folks felt like, well, just reproduce that over here. And, of course, I mean, that's what you would do if you know, were Notre Dame or something. But we're not. And we thought that would be anathema for School of Architecture in the 21st century. So we took a different approach, but approach that nonetheless attempts to resonate with the existing. We're using the same materials, except it's a rain screen system here of Indiana limestone. Its quarry is only 50 miles from the original limestone for this. We're trying to do something that's heavy, so we're using post-tension concrete, so there's a great deal of mass and volume as well. We used the landscape to create a plinth, to drop in extra studios, and really create a kind of didactic moment for our students to learn from. We had to resolve this campus problem first, though, which was an axis that goes through Old Main, I showed you, through our building, the new library, the plaza, the Union, all the way to the football stadium. Go Hogs. Fritz. The problem was because the center of the building, it was a library, it was filled with reference areas for books, so you always had to go around. And the school community, the university community, could never come through our building like they could the others. So we wanted to correct that. So we decided to core out the original building and reprogram it, bring back a lot of the existing detailing, the historic detailing, as well, and then do the addition of the new. So the T transforms to an I or an H. And so you can see some of these construction photos where we're literally coring this out just to get the crane in there to begin to rework the building. And we approached it as a kind of inversion of the existing building in this figure ground, where the mass of the building is the ground and the figures and is the ornamentation and the windows. And the inversion of that is through new technologies, new ways of thinking about space. The building becomes the figure and the window is the ground. And it's a great way to compare and contrast about how we build these days and how we operate. And we had a west elevation with terrible sun there, so it's all controlled through custom brise-soleil, glass fritted fins and steel curtain wall that's all locally made about 10 miles away. And so the whole new axes now, people can move back and forth through the building, and we reconnect ourselves with the university. 200-year-old oak trees came down. We wanted to keep those trees, so we lumbered them in South Arkansas, took it to Mississippi, had it transformed into a tableau that starts at the base of the tree, goes all the way to the top, and now we can talk about face grain, we talk about end grain, we talk about long grain with our students. But it's right on the axis, the big social space for our school. We've had Shakespearean actors up here. It acts as a stage, a mariachi band. I mean, it does exhibits, all kinds of things, and it's all part of these vitrines and everything. So it becomes an activated element in the middle of our school, just repurposing. And we have an exhibition hall, and you can see through to the old, but now this exhibition hall, this can be secured. We can interface with the larger community, the university. Our first show, of course, is retrospective Faye Jones, movable walls to control the sun. Again, the old and new connection. And then we light it up at night, and it's a lantern in the middle of the campus as well. No longer is this an architecture school that is, encapsulated like an asylum, with lights on at night and people wondering what in the hell goes on. They're on 24/7 over there, but nobody can access it. In this case, we're happy to be the jellyfish, see what's going on. Preservation, the idea of renewable spaces took quite a bit of work and thinking with the university. Just because it's old doesn't make it good. There were banal old buildings, and there were aspects of this that just weren't very good. The frescoes looked like mud. The drawings were, so we had permission to keep the bones, keep the detailing, but really get it to work with the new and get the new to work with the old. But all of this is restored and light, new lanterns and such, all the original stair, marble, and brass. The old reading room is transformed into a studio with new lighting, custom desk with lighting built in, all new mechanical systems that really clean up so that you can see the detailing. It looked like a scene from Brazil for so long with ducks hanging everywhere that this was really a great opportunity to showcase the new. And then our central space, the reference area, our largest space where all the reviews take place and great events, was always poorly lit and poor acoustics. And we needed space, so we took the roof of it off and put studios up there, and then took a 2,500 square foot fabric ceiling and backlit it, so we have even lighting, and it's perforated, so it solves the acoustics as well. And so this becomes a really very useful space for reviews and events. We can actually take these panels now and roll them out and store them. We never could do that before. And then we carved a hole right in the middle, 8-foot by 20-foot piece of glass with a window to the sky, to nature, right in the middle of the school. And I tell students to go up there and look in the vitrine. It's better than another Red Bull after they've been up about 3 nights. Stay in there, get charged up, get back to work. But very simple. And then all of this is new, so it's all been exactly matched to the old here, original, well, with plaster and everything to match the original. We use actual plaster. And then we carve a slot through the one big move to connect the old to the new so that they all come together. And that joint between is actually the new egress stairs, all framed in glass. The new studios, really tough, put in place architectural concrete. And you can see the light of how that's mitigated through the brise-soleil and balanced with artificial lighting as well. And a series of classrooms, our large classroom, the auditorium, and then it's a split screen system, so we can get a faculty lounge here where we go and gossip about students. Big learning classroom. And then underneath, the students get their own lounge wrapped in felt. And we call it the boneless chicken ranch. Kids, beanbag chairs, they go and they hang out. It's dark. You're not supposed to work. You're just supposed to, it's a chill pad. And we have showers right next door, so you can shower too. Problem with that is we had several students living rent-free for a couple of months in the first semester when it opened, so we had to solve that. But lots of natural light, but you can close that up too for events. And up top on the roof, monastic-like faculty offices, 7 by 16 feet, green roofs, Ozark sedum roof, and then an outdoor classroom here that's covered, a place of prospect and refuge. With movie nights here. This is where the students take their lunch during the day. It's a great place. So social spaces, learning spaces, all part of this that make it a unified whole, which in effect is what it's made our school now, is a unified whole. And you see the lineage here of the old, the first generation, the second generation, and now the third generation together. So we had an opportunity to take another library, which was a library from the 60s called the Fulbright Library, the library had moved, it had outgrown this building, and moved to another side of downtown, and they were going to tear this building down. It was in the historic district of Fayetteville, and so the folks who lived in all the Victorian homes came out to protect this building because they saw its value. And we were asked to come in and help renovate it, transform it into a 30,000 square foot office building. So we completely opened it up, kept the bones. The bones were good. I mean, when you get a project like this, the first thing that runs through your mind is, wow, all I can do is screw it up. Because it's a good building already. But we transformed it as delicately as we could. It's a matte building, so how to get light into it. So these walls were leaning in and falling down. They were not connected with rebar or anything. They were just laid on the top, so it was really doing this. So we removed those so we could get more light for the offices, and then we cored out a series of courtyards and also in the roof to bring light into the middle, so you could rent the downstairs the same as the upstairs. And these are quite nice without moving any of the actual bones or existing structure. We just carved away at the slab here, and then set up our own kind of language independent of the universal grid of columns that exists in the kind of mid-century modern idiom there. And then we added 2,500 square foot to the end in the same language here, and then to connotate that relationship between the old and the new, or so you could tell them apart a little bit, we create a joint between with the stair that connects with the parking lot and brings you up into this brokerage firm that's up on the second floor. And conference room, we had to deal with the acoustics, so we decided to make a kind of public artwork, something we could give back to the neighborhood. So this is what do we call this? We call this the shroud. We call it the acoustic shroud. All black zinc, all acoustically performance, but bending and angles and all that for the acoustics, and a very nice room. And this is also used by the public in the community as a community space, and they can lease that for free. And then makes a nice shadowy figure on the street at night, right in the neighborhood. So I'm keeping moving fast because I know Pamela wants to do some Q&A. So we're given yet another building. This one not so good. We're in this is all this that used to be farmland. It all becomes a commercial office park. A person we'd worked with, a woman, Victoria Butler, who wanted to enhance her Montessori campus. So we had built in a floodplain this building here a few years back, and her elementary school, and she wanted now to expand these buildings here, the horrible buildings, to across the street to kind of unite her campus. And of course, had to go across this creek with a very different building, but a primary building. This was a strip mall here, and we had to keep the strip mall. We had to build this in 5 months, design and build, for $112 a square foot. So what to do? And we had already established a palette of second growth cypress and box rib metal panels. So the bridge connects. This was what we found here. Beautiful adventure in architecture. We discovered that these columns didn't hold up anything. They were hollow. They were just there for effect. So we said, well, let's get rid of that, and then we'll kind of work on this, this piece here and make it a sun visor and a way to delimit the zone, the liminal zone between the parking lot and all the classrooms. We used the exact same openings that they already had here, but we then introduced an addition here to create a series of controlled play areas for the students. So very simple, same palette of materials, just a simple figure out of a strip mall. And it also works with the sun. As the sun moves around, it creates the shade that's needed. And then as you come in, it's very, like I say, inexpensive. We splurged on some wood and some laminate here for a desk. But the V here comes together, becomes an important moment where the students, all their display of their work is here in the hallways. It wraps around. And then the simple courtyard that the students hang out, play in. There's several different courtyards there. Anyways, making something out of nothing right there. So what was a liability in this neighborhood now becomes an asset and an amenity, and all for $112 a square foot. So in that spirit, we were approached by a library board in a town, Gentry, Arkansas, a town of 2,500, a relatively poor town. They had one industry in town, a Little Debbie snack food plant, along with a wild country safari zoo, where you drive through the landscape and emus and monkeys chase you while you throw Wonder Bread out the window. That's it. That's what they had. But they had a dream of having their library, which was a public library that was privately funded, to be on Main Street, to reactivate Main Street, as what you can see had kind of fallen into some sort of disrepair. And they had bought a building from one of the local families for $1, an old 100-year-old hardware store. This is it. This is how we found it. It's in Tornado Alley in this part of Arkansas, so it had been hit by storms, a brick parapet blown off, a lot of the brick detailing blown, all the windows are blown out and boarded up. This is it. And they said, hey, we need you to turn this into a library. We want a community room here, a genealogy department. We want to showcase historical artifacts from the city. And I was like, okay, well, I think the best thing I can advise you to do is let's tear it down. There's no architectural significance here because it'll be less expensive just to start from the ground up. And they looked at me like I had insulted them in some way. And it's like, oh, we can't do that. I said, this has been a socioeconomic hub in our town for nearly 100 years. We're very sentimental about it. And the mayor who was in the meeting said, yeah, as a child, I used to eat barbecued beaver out of the bottom in here. We'll eat anything in Arkansas. So it's like, well, what to do? And they said, we don't want a fake history. We want a new identity. And after weeks and weeks of yellow trace, lots of soft pencils and sketching and a little bourbon and a lot of cussing, finally figured out what to do. And we came to the conclusion that we shouldn't do anything, that the ticks and wrinkles that had been achieved over 100 years gave it expressive character, much like we get that when we age, right? And I thought, well, what we could do is give it a new identity through the elements, right? Through the doors, the windows, the columns, and really showcase the building and showcase what's inside the building, turn the building inside out. So we came up with a series of details, I like to call it soap bubble details, that act as vitrines. This is kind of, in some ways, a bit of a homage to Franco Albini and Sigurd Liberec in some ways. But we totally kind of rethought the syntax. We even made up a steel parapet that replaced the one that had been blown off years ago. This is when it was being built. And so this becomes a new vocabulary that gives us this new identity. And we had to do it for $108 a square foot. Today, it's still the least expensive public library in the state of Arkansas. Very difficult. It took 7 years to build, had to be rebid 3 times. It was very difficult. They had very little money. But this little town raised their own millage and then got a donation from the Little Debbie snack food family. And we were able to build this for $1.1 million, over 10,000 square feet. And it's a tough town. This is the mayor right here. And he owns a tattoo parlor. But he's the best. I wish he would have ran for president. He's the best politician I know. And he got us through 7 years of hell with the local city council. But we got this built, and just again, very simple. The reading stacks down below, up above, the genealogy department, the community room here. This is where all the clubs in the town happen. And then the Little Debbie's Snack Food Pocket Park right here. Plaza in the back, future home of the a place to showcase their antique fire truck. And it's the brick chassis here, and then the kit of parts that we designed that all come together, even a beacon on top of the old sky light here to mark the center of town. And again, it's a beacon in the middle of town, a seed project for the rebirth of Main Street here. We use structural sealant with big pieces of glass, and then we build wood frames to hold them in place, let it cure for 28 days, pull it away, and it's just a beautiful soap bubble, transparent interface between the street and the reading areas. And the pressed-in ceiling could not be messed with. That was absolute, no lights, no HVAC. So the mayor got county prisoners to come over and take each tile down, and then they restored it off-site and brought it back. And so everything is, all the HVAC is from the side here. And then to get light, we had to replace the column, so I always wanted to bring Mies into a project. So there's Mies, wrap it in glass, wrap it in books, put the light here, bounce it off the ceiling, and you get your lighting for the reading area. And the old lift becomes an exhibit for the old buggies that used to be sold upstairs and brought down, hooked up to horses. Place for the librarian who wanted to be away from the people. She says, I don't like people, I like books. So we have her own little haunt there. And just opportunities to take in existing openings and bend the north light around into the space and create an opportunity for the intersection of something that could be considered almost spiritual with the prosaic. And this is a project we're very excited about. It's won the National AI Library Award. It's I don't know, it's been published everywhere. But our greatest sense of satisfaction is knowing that when we started this project in this town of 2,500, there were 300 library card holders. Today, there are over 2,300 library card holders in this town. So it demonstrates the fact that architecture can be transformative and it can strengthen institutions as well. And now the downtown, I can't say it's all perfect or great, but it's coming back. So I want to end with this last project in the spirit of everything we've talked about of, again, repurposing, taking the world as it's giving to you and finding ways to represent it. So we were approached by an Orthodox Christian community in Springdale, Arkansas, who had been worshiping in a rundown office building in downtown. This was their space. All their icons and their symbols and all that were herded into, trailer paneling and ACT ceilings and so forth. And they felt it was a very undignified place for them to worship. And they had come into some money. They bought us some property right along the interstate here, City Park, and they had some structures that came with it. And then these are all the mega churches that they're around. So they wanted to be seen from the highway and kind of, take on the other churches, in terms of a presence. And they had $100 a square foot for the building. And they said, could you build this for us? And we were like, well, yeah, if we made it out of cardboard or something, I don't know. And I said, and we certainly don't want to go down this road. These are adventures in religious architecture where I live. Let's hang a cross on a metal building. Here you go. I mean, nobody would live in one of these, and I don't understand why you would want to worship in one either, but that's a whole nother debate on values. I grew up a Southern Baptist. I understand this world very well. But they said, no, we can't do that. But however, this is what we have, and since we only have $100 a square foot, could you turn this into our sanctuary and fellowship hall? And I said, you mean like tear it down and build? And they're like, no, this is it. So our hearts just dropped, into our stomachs. And it was like, wow, we finally get a church, and this is it. So we went back to origins. We went back to the Greeks. We thought about, well, the whole Orthodox Church and the Greek. And we thought, what is it that we as architects can do that doesn't cost anything? And it's scale and proportion. That doesn't cost anything. And we're supposed to be the experts in that. And so we looked at scale and proportioning systems from the Greeks and decided we're just going to reproportion this thing based in the roots of their own religion. And that's what we did. And this is what we came up with. All working through the golden mean with a little bit of Corbusier, because that goes well with everything, I think. This figure, singular figure, embodies many things for them, the colors in the glass, the icons, and again, the symbolism. And we're able to do that by just keeping the building intact. We just actually put studs around it and rewrapped it with a new box rib metal skin. We added 10 feet to the front of it to create a narthex, runs north-south, that we could then intersect with the axis running east-west, which was very important to the congregation. And then this is the fellowship hall with movable walls and wheels that can allow for overflow during certain times, certain rituals, worship services during the year. And everything is coursed out beautifully with this box rib off-the-shelf metal system. We customized the corner transitional details to give it as flat of an abstract look as we can. Again, we're trying to get as reductive in the figure as we can, not unlike a barn or something like that. It's coursed so well that this is the fire door. We have to put a little concrete pad there so you can see where it is. And that's it from the highway. Most of our projects in Arkansas come with cows, you probably imagine. And we light it up at night so you can see it. Section through the narthex, Father John's office here. The niche for St. Nicholas, their patron saint. Return air duct, which is Arkansas white oak, has a steel channel filled with sand here that you take candles out of and come beneath the tower with the cross and the blood of Christ that you're washed in before you enter into the sanctuary. So here you go. You come in, we cut one window on the east side into the existing building here to get the morning light in the east. And then the iconostasis is all angle iron. We made very transparent. These are actual doors. You can then get back into the altar area. There's Father John, his regalia. We gave them everything, but the one thing we couldn't give them was a dome, because the steel structure on the top couldn't be cut through, so they allowed us to put one in the plenum. But they couldn't afford the big fiberglass dome we had spec'd, and the contractor's like, I can't build a dome. I mean, it won't look very good. It might look like an ellipse or something, who knows. So we were a bit flummoxed. We're in the middle of construction, but our contractor, ever creative, came up with an idea. He says, I know a friend of mine who's a metal worker 20 miles away who loves beer. So for 2 cases of beer, we can get a satellite dish, and that can become our dome. So that's exactly what we did. We went and gave this guy some beer. He takes it apart for us. We put it on a truck, and I mean, we're literally under construction. So satellite dishes they're their own lath, so you can plaster them right. You don't have to put lath on them. So we plastered it here, jacked it up on the scissor lift, and they have their dome. So that's how we roll in Arkansas. So one of the building committee's members was so excited about this, he said, I can get us a free bishop's chair too. It's walnut, it's crushed purple velvet upholstery, and I can get it for free. And I said, really? I said, where are you getting it? And he goes, well, it's part of an ad campaign at a local liquor store. He goes, I just don't know what we're going to do with the embroidered CR on it. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, Crown Royal. And Father John was listening in, and he came over, and he thought a minute, and he says, no, Christ the Redeemer. Anyways, that's how we go. So in 2013, we were given a call by Elizabeth Henry, who's the head of the National AIA Awards Committee, Honor Awards Committee, to let us know that this had won a National AIA Honor Award. She said, we were struck by how inexpensive this was, $100 a square foot. So we did some research on our own, and we discovered this is the least expensive building to ever win a National AIA Honor Award. And we were so pleased to hear this, because it underscored what we've been trying to do all along for the last 25 years in this part of the world, which is to demonstrate that architecture can happen anywhere, it can happen at any scale, at any budget, and for anyone. Thank you. Pamela says we can take questions. So, And we finished in just under an hour, so that's good. I can only take 3, so I'm happy to wait. And I know you're stunned into silence. Yes, sir. Oh, yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. I didn't see you.
Oh,
Right there.
Marlon,
I just saw a hand.
I just wanted to ask you what you'd like to do that you haven't done in your future.
I used to say an ex-president's library, but anyways, no. We'd love the opportunity to do a church, another church. And we're working on one right now that's very special in Bentonville that is an interfaith center. It's the Episcopal Church and the mosque got together and signed an agreement, and the Jewish community is also working with them too. It to become the first interfaith center in the U.S. where they'll all share one building. Right now it's just the two, but we're working. That's in fundraising. It's already Alice Walton is generously helping fund it as well. So that's something we're working on that I would say we're really excited and we hope can happen. Yeah. Yes, I saw a hand, but maybe you were, no? Yes.
This is fantastic, Marlon. Thanks so much for showing all this work. Arkansas has a huge presence in a lot of these projects and in your whole discourse. And I wonder if you find working elsewhere to be really invigorating or really challenging, or do you welcome working in totally different contexts as rooted as you are in Arkansas?
Yeah, no, I think it's like writing about different places, right? Writers deal in the particulars, and at least good writing deals with particulars. And so we look at the particulars of wherever we're working as a way to, again, generate ideas and how to respond. It's in many ways it's about listening carefully to a place so that you can respond boldly to what's there. So we're doing a project now in Dallas. We're doing another one in Indianapolis. We're hoping to, continue to do projects that are outside of our region, so to speak. But we're in that state of transitioning from a local firm that is national to perhaps a national firm that happens to be local. So it's a good time for us there. We're in this kind of transition right now. So, but I think we can take it on, because I think the one thing we've demonstrated as a firm is that we can scale up. A lot of firms that start out in residential and small scale have difficulty scaling up. And I think the way in which we operate allows us to be very agile in terms of the scales that we work at. So, yeah. All right, there's the third one.
Could you tell us just a little bit more about, could you tell us just a little bit more about your design thinking on that library? What was the evolution of that? I'm really struck by the wonderful interplay between the as-found aspects of the building and this very clear modernist vocabulary.
Yeah.
How did that evolve?
Well, first of all, I think it's a project I couldn't have done when I started, because I wasn't mature enough to do that. I would have had to, dump every idea I've ever had onto it. I think it only comes out of lots of passionate but patient, hard-loving work in the trenches, so to speak. It also comes from traveling. I think the opportunity to study in Italy and seeing the works of Scarpa and Albini and Leverance and so forth, understanding what they struggle with every day, this existing amazing fabric that they have to intervene on at times, and how to do that. And so I think the toughest part, as I alluded to, was coming to the conclusion that the best thing to do is nothing. It's kind of the art of war sort of approach to the building, and then refocus our interest in elements, because elements are often the way to achieve maximum meaning with the minimum of means, rather than through form. So, I love all the formal stuff. I teach and I love the formal. You can ask my former student here when I used to teach with Peter Eisman. I love that. But where I work it's just, it's not even plausible. How do you find expressive character in what you do? And so very often we find it through elements. So this was an opportunity, by the very nature or circumstance we were given, to step away from form and really deal with what is tangible, what operates at the scale of elements. And most projects deal with the civic, with the formal, and with the elemental, but very few start with the elemental and work outwards. And this was where that thinking came in. Yes.
I really like how you take the forms of rural Arkansas and then transform them into some of these very different building types. So that's just a comment. Then kind of have a question about when you're working with an existing building. So in the architecture school, it was very much, well, it was sort of stylistically your style, the addition. And then when you were working at the Fulbright Library, it was, well, here's a mid-century modern building. We're making some changes to it, but still the aesthetic of the changes in the existing building was mid-century modern. Then we're putting an addition on, and the addition was mid-century modern. Mm-hmm. So that's two entirely different approaches in those two projects. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that and how you might approach a third project where there is a building of a specific period, whatever it might be, and how you might approach another addition.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for us, architecture is situational, so we don't work from a position of theory, which we find to be exclusive, so we try to be inclusive. So we really have to take the project on its own terms and begin to understand the DNA of that existing condition and then speculate on how that DNA, might extend itself for the future to adapt to certain programs or other external or internal forces. In the case of the library, it only made sense as a contemporary work of architecture to extend it because that is an operation of extension, whereas at the architecture school, it was one really literally of adaptation or addition, an aggregate, right, which we felt we could deal with differently. And everything comes with its own sort of story, right? And I don't think the story of the architecture school would be very satisfactory if it's a quotation of some sort of what's on the other side. And we were asked by the school, could you do a loggia and all that? And it's like, God, we already have a loggia, and they screwed it up, and I just don't want to, be part of that. And I didn't show you the building across from this. Albert Speer comes to Arkansas. But so I think it's just, the approach is situational and just finding the right resonant response to what's there that allows the existing building to have its own identity, a certain sort of dignified presence, and allow the new one to not detract from that, but actually to resonate with it again. And so there's a singular identity for the whole, but then there are subsets of identities. So that's how we kind of come at it. So it's very situational. And I couldn't tell you, without seeing, or the project in particular, how I would respond. I would just have to be there, and we'll see what happens. Yeah, sounds so, beatnik. So sorry. Great. One more, yeah, in the back.
For any of these projects, have you had to work with historic commissions? And if so, have you found that to be more fruitful or more limiting?
Well, that's a great question. We worked with the state historic program or whatever in Little Rock for the architecture school. We did everything in our power to save the exterior of that building. All the glass in the architecture school, the existing glass, is still single pane. We took down every window, recondition it, put single pane, because we discovered we could put the triple pane glass, those storm windows over it like they do, and it would take 300 years in energy savings to actually get the cost of that back. So what we did is put automatic solar shades on the inside that track the sun, so we could keep the single pane windows. I mean, we went through a lot of pain and work with the Historic Commission of the state to make sure that the exterior particularly was protected. I thought it was affirming, and I thought it was also great working with them too about the interior, and they listened to us about how we could approach the interior to get a more unified look on the interior. And that's really, I think, the strength of the project is its interior. It really, I mean, it's just seamless. People say they come in and it's like, wow, you know, this feels so right. And it's because they were not dogmatic about, you got to save every little stencil line or whatever, every little painted egg and dart, you know. And, you know, there was an approach that gave us some latitude. I think it was very positive. So that was the only really experience that we've had. When we go to commissions, you know, most of the time these towns are just happy to have a project. You have to understand that, you know, a lot of these towns I show you, half of their fabric is empty. You know, to just have a project there, something that's vital that brings life to the city, is in itself enough. But but we feel personally responsible to dignify these buildings, not to, you know, create the pastiche of history, but really something much more dignified and responsive. So, thank you.
Marlon, thank you. I can't think of a better way to kick off what I hope is going to be an equally stimulating day tomorrow. For those of you who are signed up for the Design and Heritage Conference, coffee and registration starts at 8:30, and the program will start sharply at 9. We have a sold-out house, so if you want a seat, I'd encourage you to get here early. And for those of you who'd like to continue the conversation with Marlon and others, upstairs in the upper gallery, we have some refreshments, and thank you again.